we request the chair to please take over.
Hello, dear colleagues, can you hear me? Okay. Thanks a lot, dear friends. It's a great honor to welcome you on our panel devoted to humanitarian aspects of diplomacy. It's a great honor for me to see here as the speakers, the region experts and practitioners and scholars working in the field and who have found time to spend with us to discuss these very important problems of humanitarian aspects of diplomacy. As you know, modern trends have significantly expanded the boundaries of diplomacy. Today, we are going to discover what are the similarities and differences of humanitarian diplomacy with the traditional one. It can be used as an innovative tool to bring nations closer together, despite the recent upsurge in armed conflicts worldwide and a unprecedented global challenge we are facing nowadays. Also, we are going to talk about various national models of humanitarian diplomacy. I suppose that one of the key defects of modern diplomacy is its impossibility to deal with the key international crisis, like humanitarian catastrophe we are witnessing nowadays. About 80 million forcibly displaced people for the first time in world history. And now with the Afghanistan situation, it would also only worsen. What will these people do? How will they be educated? Where will they work? It should be the matter of the humanitarian diplomacy that it currently fails to deal with. During our current panel, our leading practitioners and scholars will talk about all these trends, and I'm very glad to start our panel that was co-hosted by NICE Nepal and by Russian Academy of National Economy and Public Administration. As the first speaker, I would like to invite Daria Akhutina, who is senior advisor at the Council of the Baltic Sea States and who knows, I suppose, everything about humanitarian diplomacy of the Baltic states and of other European states. Thanks a lot, Daria, for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anna, and it's really a pleasure to see you again. And thank you for inviting me to share the experience from the Baltic Sea region and on behalf of the Council of the Baltic Sea States. I wonder if you can see my presentation. I think it's better.
Yes, Daria, thank you. We can see it.
So I will just, so hello dear colleagues and best regards from the northern part of Europe and northwestern part of Europe. As I mentioned, I represent here Council of the Baltic Sea States, and our motto I think is very much in line with the title of this session, and it sounds as building collaboration and trust, promoting peace, stability, dialogue and development in the Baltic Sea region. So I think that I will start just to tell you that we are an intergovernmental organization being established in 1992, and it was really another environment in the Baltic Sea region. In 1992, it was only 2 countries members of the European Union. It was Denmark and Germany, and it was 2 countries who initiated to establish the Baltic, the Council of the Baltic Sea States, to harmonize and to balance the representation of all parties of the region. And you see the composition of countries. They are quite different, although we belong to the same region. We see here Germany and Poland, Scandinavian countries, Finland, Baltic states, and Russian Federation. Now we are facing quite different situation from 2004. The environment changed significantly, and now it's only 3 countries who are not members of the European Union, and it's Iceland, Norway, and Russian Federation. All others now are part of the European Union. We are operating together with a committee of senior officials appointed by foreign ministries of our member states. And here I think is a very important approach we have now. It's a 2-level approach, and it's political dialogue provided by high-level representatives, foreign officers, ministries, and practical cooperation. And here, again, it's very much related to this people-to-people diplomacy and all possible humanitarian aspects of cooperation. Currently, we have 3 long-term priorities, and it's sustainable and prosperous region, regional identity, and safe and secure region. So basically, it's very much about all where public people-to-people diplomacy could contribute a lot. I just want to mention that Baltic Sea region has a very, very long traditions of cooperation at all levels. Just to mention that besides our Council of the Baltic Sea States, we have Baltic Sea sub-regional cooperation, promoting regional cooperation among regions of countries, Union of Baltic Cities, it's a level of municipalities, Baltic Sea NGO Forum, it's a level of NGOs, HELCOM, experts on environment dealing with marine environment. We are all around the sea, so sea is really the asset of the Baltic Sea region. VASAP dealing with the maritime spatial planning. The composition of countries are the same as for Council Baltic Sea States, but it's different level of cooperation. As you can see, really we are very different countries, although belong to the same region. We have a very different cultural and historical background, but we are looking for what unites us rather than what divides us, and also trying to use this historical and cultural connection based on rich heritage from the past. I can just to mention all Hanseatic lines and Viking roads and the cultural historical heritage. Where we really trying to support cooperation at all levels is a youth cooperation, culture, environment, as I mentioned, maritime economy, science, research, education, sustainable development, including United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And I was very happy to see that NICE also mentioned this important global framework for cooperation as implementation of Sustainable Development Goals, although we are looking how to localize their implementation at place at the Baltic Sea region. We are also dealing with to promote a fair labor market and labor mobility and social well-being. You see that our cooperation is very much based also on challenges, since we are all neighboring countries. We have the same air, same water, which does not apply to borders between EU and non-EU, but we just have the common space to deal with. And as a consequences, we have to deal with the common challenges, looking for solutions which can be found jointly on the most efficient way. Whom we just see as the actors of people-to-people diplomacy. As I mentioned, we are working a lot with local actors, with research and education institutions, cultural institutions, professional associations. Here's a very, very different, starting from trade unions and employer organizations, and ending in maritime policies, the Baltic Port Organization. So it's all associations which can contribute to the sustainable development of our region. Of course, we are dealing even with and cooperating actively with the private sector and NGOs. I'd like to provide some concrete examples, since we have very short time. As I mentioned, we have EU and non-EU countries in our region, and we invited researchers together with private sector, municipalities to use the Sustainable Development Goals implementation as a common framework for cooperation between EU and non-EU countries. We have defined 6 areas of common concern and common interest, and we have divided the Sustainable Development Goals. They are very much about cross-cutting issue, of course, in Sustainable Development Goals, but we made this attempt to divide them accordingly to these prioritized topics and areas, and see how jointly we could put our efforts into implementation of SDGs and 2030 agenda in the Baltic Sea region. Currently, we're starting this September to draft the plan for common actions for sustainability of the region, involving all actors. Another just example, we are also started very exciting project basically on sustainable tourism, but it's how to promote Baltic Sea region guest harbors as a single destination. Here we have a lot of people invited. It's starting from young PhDs, and tourism actors, young entrepreneurs, small and medium-sized enterprise, all around these small and medium-sized companies in the maritime sectors dealing with the Baltic and the Baltic Sea region. Another good example is what we are doing with CBSS Science Research Innovation Agenda. We're supporting academic mobilities among young scientists and researchers. We have special topics which we think Baltic Sea region is a front runner: is sustainable energy and energy efficiency, digital growth, healthcare and biotech. We're facilitating schools for young scientists. It's also all about young and younger actors and their teachers also. We have some of publications can be found at our website. You can see here it's about the Baltic Science Network Mobility Program for research. We have worked out some tools supporting also building partnerships for further cooperation and joint research, because our idea, of course, to keep talented, advanced young researchers inside the region for the sake of the region's sustainability, and to open the common usage of science infrastructure for it. As I mentioned, we have some topics where really the Baltic Sea region can be seen as a front runner. Just what I'd like to mention, that despite all tensions which we currently facing in our region, it's always possible to find a way to connect people, to promote this human dimension of the cooperation. And I think CBSS, Council of the Baltic Sea States, provides a very good example how we can provide this politically coordinated support at all levels, despite that we are the structure built by ministries of foreign affairs of 11 countries plus European Commission. We have found the way how we can support local actors, how we can support people-to-people diplomacy, because as you've seen, one of our long-term priorities also regional identity. But regional identity does not mean that we are all the same. On the contrary, we gain from that we are different, but we have a same idea to live in a sustainable, prosperous region, to promote peace, trust among neighboring countries and citizens around our region. It can be done by different means. You can imagine that we face now a challenging situation on political level, but despite this, the cooperation on this practical level and people-to-people level, it develops on a very good way. I see, as I'm just show you, we have a very good examples to showcase how it's possible even during the times of quite challenging political contexts. So that I mean, I know that we excuse me, it's of some different way shows here. So here you can see all our contact details, and organizers can certainly send out my presentation, our contact details, and you're always welcome. We are open to share our experience and very interested to hear more outside our region as well. So thank you very much.
Yeah, Daria, thanks a lot for being with us from Stockholm now, I suppose, yes?
Thank you very much. We're also happy to be with you today.
And also thanks for covering broad opportunities of humanitarian diplomacy of Baltic states. And I'm glad that people like you are working in this organization who are like goodwill ambassadors of joint neighborhood projects. And also we would proceed towards questions. I think that some our listeners would ask it. And now we would like to proceed towards our next speaker. This is Dr. Manish Dabhade, Assistant Professor of the School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. The topic is public diplomacy in COVID times, challenges and opportunities.
Thanks, Anna. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and obviously, a big congratulations to Dr. Pramod Jaiswal. Very much as SIS product from where I'm a teacher right now. So it's great. Congratulations that this is such a wonderful convention which you have been. I mean, really a mega show of sorts, and trying to get the best minds to speak and interact. As was pointed out, I am going to speak on public diplomacy in COVID times, challenges and opportunities. Since the time given to each speaker is very small, I would just stick to the big picture. And obviously, as the session title is about humanitarian aspects of diplomacy, so very much public diplomacy, I'll be talking about how, to what extent it is humanity centered or humanity driven or humanitarian kind of diplomacy. And again, we'll also be discussing fairly obviously in small measure, but what sort of diplomatic agenda do we have now, what sort of diplomatic actors are center stage, and what processes are being deployed by different actors on different issues. To set the ball rolling, obviously, what exactly is public diplomacy? So public diplomacy is really international communication. So it is communication beyond your borders, beyond the state's borders. So it is largely about foreign publics. So you're directly reaching out to foreign publics, but public diplomacy is increasingly also being used to influence your own domestic population. So that is also one interesting facet, but again, nothing to do with COVID, but that is also happening already. And as I was mentioning, that this is really, when you're talking about public diplomacy, it is really a citizen-centric, people-driven diplomacy. And again, the idea is of public diplomacy is to develop really solid, very collective linkages between policy and people, and also arena. So I think that is largely what public diplomacy is all about. Coming to COVID, obviously, Corona, this pandemic has really spread its influence, has had an impact at each level of human interactions, but also how international organizations, how states, how within states, intra-states, and at a basic level, even individuals are being affected in many ways by the corona pandemic. So what essentially is happening because of COVID is obviously that, and I would be arguing that it has really changed not just the style of diplomacy, but even the substance of diplomacy, substance of public diplomacy. And what we are essentially seeing is that, but we also need to keep in mind that what has COVID, what has this pandemic done is there were deep trends which were already influencing the trajectory of diplomacy in a particular way. And in fact, what COVID did was it really, I mean, really fastened that, really accelerated that in manifold when COVID struck us. So what you were already witnessing was a digital revolution, a technological revolution, which was already propelling diplomacy, which was already pushing public diplomacy into a virtual mode. So that has definitely accelerated, as I was pointing out. And again, when you talk about public diplomacy, the strategic thinking is really that you have to reach out to the citizen, you have to reach out to the larger population. So I think that is what is extremely important, that you are really talking about the larger population, the citizen centric. And again, here we need to understand that what is really happening is, especially in the developed part of the world, we have the problem of, I mean, the central problem of public diplomacy also is about demographic changes. That in the developed countries you have a largely aging population, and in developing world you have the youth bulge. So how do states reach out to those specific categories of peoples, to those demographic sections, I think remains a principal challenge of public diplomacy. And as was pointed out that earlier, just a sec. What you could make out is that, as in fact Thomas Friedman had already pointed out, that the world is flat, and this was way back in 2005. That is now, in fact, I mean, it came, I mean, as early as 2005. But what we are now seeing is obviously is that, okay, that trend was carrying on, but with COVID, what is happening directly to diplomacy is that the international travel came to a halt. The meetings came dramatically down, dramatically reduced, and again we still have social distancing, we still have sanitary measures, very limited points of contact. I think that is what we need to keep in mind, how COVID has directly impacted diplomacy and obviously public diplomacy. Then I move to really pointing out what is exactly the diplomatic agenda now, in the arena of public diplomacy. And here I think, looking carefully at different joint statements, different agreements, different vision statements, pick up any of them and you can immediately figure out what exactly are the issues of conversations between different states. So it is really about health diplomacy, it is really about science diplomacy. These I think are really capturing the imagination of our diplomats, especially in the field of public diplomacy. So what are the goals of these of public diplomacy now? The goal is obviously health security, and again, what diplomacy or PD, public diplomacy, is actually doing is that you are now focusing your energies on access to vaccines. How can we easily access vaccines, medical equipment? So you have the PPE kits. Now you have different different medicines. So I think that is what you are really looking at. You are also looking at different scientific collaborations. So the agenda is, the diplomatic agenda of public diplomacy is, how can you reach out to a larger community of scientists, of actors, of different actors, and we come to the section actors later in just in a few seconds. But I think the most important part of public diplomacy is really reaching out to citizens. If you would remember, early last year when the pandemic hit us, there were different categories of people stuck in different parts of the world. So evacuating them from those hot zones of pandemic, I think that and how are you going to reach out to those citizens? So because if you look at the social media then, Twitter, Facebook, Insta, they were flooded with requests about what is happening about relatives, how are we going to move back to our home countries. So evacuation, repatriation, people who were stuck in different countries wanted to go back home, wanted to be with their family members. So there was a deluge of citizen requests coming through different social media, and public diplomacy, the job of public diplomacy was really to calm the tempers, to really look at what sort of crisis was happening, and again responded in a very positive way. And again, the responses were not just about medical, I mean, support was not just about providing medical emergency help. It was also about mental support. That's exactly why you see a sudden proliferation of these movements of positivity. Yoga was really seen as something which was giving stability, a mental stability to the pressures and pulls of the pandemic, in those particular phases, especially when the pandemic was really hitting all of us very, very hard. The next thing I would like to point out is diplomatic actors. So what sort of actors did come into play in the arena of public diplomacy after COVID came? And I think here the important part is that that states continued and continue to remain consequential, the most consequential actors in the sphere of diplomacy, either bilaterally or multilaterally. Again, you also had those supra-state organizations, we can call it that also, UN, WHO, G20, G7, BRICS. They were equally important actors, looking at different, so you had different summits being held virtual, in the virtual format. But you also had very important development is that paradiplomacy also come into play. And in fact, I guess we have a paper also in this session. And again here, so you have at the state level, at the local level, cities, for example, reaching out to different cities and offering and having a diplomatic interaction. Then also in terms of actors, suddenly you see that because the focus is health security, the focus is on vaccine diplomacy, science diplomacy, so you have different scientific establishments. So you had the government establishments, you had the private actors for multinational companies, you also had, and obviously WHO played a very important role in terms of gathering of the scientific community and trying to come out with different alerts, trying to tell about different developments on vaccines, taking care in especially when about COVID related information. So I think that in terms of actors, so that is the change we can immediately see in since especially last year. And again, the last point, obviously, is about the diplomatic processes. So, what sort of processes came into play again on public diplomacy in the COVID aspect, which was there, but what came out in a very different way was nation branding, state branding. So, what one essentially witnessed was that you really had a category of states which were deemed as successful. So here you had Taiwan, you had South Korea, you had, for example, Singapore. So these three states. Then initially, obviously, China, you can see really moved dramatically its diplomacy towards what you see is that after initial drawing flag about the origin, China moved dramatically its public diplomacy to now seen as a success story. And here again, the success story. So that is a problem. So in terms of failures, obviously you had many countries, US for example, you had Italy, and again India also. You see that the diplomacy really moved, the PD, the public diplomacy really moved, talking about, so obviously you had the Vande Bharat mission, which really was about successful evacuation of foreign nationals to the respective countries and evacuation from different.
Peter, I'm sorry, 1 minute left.
I mean, a night. Yeah, sure. So I'll just wrap it up. And again, so what is happening now is, in terms of processes, there seems to be a challenge between the democratic models and the authoritarian models. So it's China versus the US playing out in a big way, even on the issue of Corona. In terms of challenges, and that is where my last point is, that in terms of challenges, obviously there is an issue of digital divide, there is an issue of digital access, about digital skills, and the last point is that there still are real geopolitical issues, for example, of US China, India China, and look at now Afghanistan. So I think they are still going to drive the diplomacy of different states, and public diplomacy is definitely going to be going to be challenged and affected by that larger geopolitical competition. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, dear Professor, for giving a theoretical framework of our today's session, and for sure maybe later we would discuss the question of humanitarian diplomacy, of public diplomacy, P2P diplomacy, science diplomacy. So this theoretical framework is also very important and insightful. Thanks a lot. And now I'm very happy to introduce our next speaker. It's Senem Cevik, who is lecturer at University of California, Irvine. She's one of the best world experts of public diplomacy and author of Turkish public diplomacy for Polgrave Macmillan, as well as lots of other books and articles. And also she is young mother, and I'm happy that she has found time for being with us here. Senem, merhaba.
Hi, merhaba. Thank you, dear Anna, and thank you for inviting me to this wonderful conference. It's an honor and pleasure to speak with all of you. This is also our second time together on our panel, online panel, but we've been on panels together. Thank you again for inviting me. It's been very enlightening so far. I would like to talk about my case study, which is Turkey and humanitarian diplomacy. And I'm so happy we have experts from many parts of the world that I think we'll have a good Q&A So basically what I want to talk about is the different levels of humanitarian diplomacy that is currently undertaken by Turkey and the difficulties that Turkey is facing right now as we see the refugee crisis, as you mentioned, and also as Dr. Manish mentioned, there are challenges we see today, especially with the crisis in Afghanistan unfolding. So Turkey's approach to humanitarian diplomacy has a few components at state level and a non-state level. And the state level is comprised, on the state level, the focus is on sustainable development and humanitarian assistance. The Turkish Red Crescent, which is the equivalent of the Red Cross, for example, and the Turkish Cooperation and Coordination Agency, it's a state institution. And they basically spearhead the efforts in delivering assistance on the ground. In Myanmar and Rohingya crisis in Syria, in Haiti, they've been in Haiti. So multiple different areas, we see them in multiple different areas in different parts of the world. But Turkey also works in the non-profit or non-state actor side of things. And we see a lot of small non-state organizations, especially they are, I would call them like Islamically oriented or religiously influenced organizations that do work on the ground. For example, multiple organizations have delivered assistance in Myanmar and Syria and other countries that see especially they're Muslim minorities or Muslim persons in hard times. So these organizations, they have people on the ground who live there and who work there and who can sometimes have a better leverage to communicate with the locals because of religious and cultural affinity. So that may be an advantage to other non-regional actors to have the Turkish NGOs on the ground. This is also the case for Turkey's assistance in Somalia or Sudan or other parts of the African continent. There's a second element to Turkey's humanitarian assistance, which is the mediation efforts. Turkey and mediation has been a very big part of Turkey's foreign policy and also public diplomacy, perhaps a decade ago. We saw Turkey trying to mediate between the Syrian government and the opposition, and between Syria and Israel or other countries in its regional affinity or affiliation. But we've seen that capacity dwindle. I believe because of Turkey's position in the region and its not necessarily alliances, but its conflicts or disagreements with its regional partners. So because of the fallout with neighbors and partners, Turkey has lost its original ability to be a mediator at the table. Now, I hope that comes back because Turkey is an important actor in the region and it can really contribute because of, again, it can speak, it can understand the problems of the region, perhaps sometimes much better than those who are not from this region. So that's an advantage, but unfortunately has lost that ability, especially, for example, the mediation between Israel and Palestine, or Palestinian Authority. Turkey is very outspoken about that humanitarian crisis. However, it's not as effective as much as it speaks. So it cannot, the actions are not coming because Turkey is not speaking to Israel as much as it's speaking to its Palestinian friends and partners. So it's important to have, it's basically a leveled ground and relationship with all the regional partners. And hopefully this will get better. But that mediation has been a very important part of Turkey's humanitarian diplomacy traditionally, but also until the last decade or so. Turkey is still very active in other regions, but as I said, it can do better in other areas. This approximate region, for example. Refugee settlement is a very important element of Turkey's humanitarian diplomacy. For those who have not heard, but I'm sure you all are experts and you have some sort of knowledge about the Syrian refugee crisis. Turkey, being on the border of Syria, is hosting more than 3 million, at least 3 million guests/refugees currently dispersed around Turkey. Now, the official rhetoric has also changed on the Syrian refugee crisis. Up to the last 2 years or so, Turkey was really focused on open arms policy, bringing everyone basically who's in need of a home, who's in need of escaping the war. But there is now a domestic backlash that we see against refugees, and also against a possibility of an Afghan refugee influx. So Turkey being on the border, like a buffer zone, Turkey is now being treated, it feels it's being treated as like a buffer between Europe and all the refugees that are coming from the east and coming from the south. This, I believe, has a potential of a crisis that will unfold domestically in Turkey. We are seeing ethnic tensions currently, some tensions between communities, the Syrian refugees and Turks living in areas together. Issues of unemployment is really triggering some of these, or issues of basically acculturation, how to integrate these refugees, how to integrate these new basically citizens. They're not official citizens, but it seems like Syrian refugees are here to stay in Turkey. So there is a part of anxiety in Turkey. How to integrate, how to provide education is a big part of the problem. How to provide safe housing, jobs. These are very important, and these are creating anxiety in both the host community and the guests. So what I want to say about humanitarian diplomacy in terms of refugee settlement is it's not a one-person job. It's not only on one country or two countries that are on the border. An international community really has to step up here. Otherwise, this is a crisis that will really spill out. And it's not going to be contained in Turkey, unfortunately. In the short run, it seems like, yes, Turkey can contain for another year or 5 years, but eventually it will have a spill out effect. So Turkey is doing what, even more than what I think it has offered to do in terms of refugee settlement and the humanitarian element of, this diplomacy, refugee diplomacy. But there needs to be a joint effort in trying to find a more long-term and sustainable solution to this. And again, going back to mediation, Turkey's involvement in regional mediation is very important, and it has to be back at the table, mediating with other parties. So again, having a regional, in speaking terms, each country has to be in speaking terms so some part of maybe back channel diplomacy or people-to-people diplomacy is very important in setting up those channels, rebuilding the communication with regional actors such as, Egypt, for example, and Turkey to be talking together. And hopefully it's going to that stage soon. Thank you. Thank you, Anna.
Dear Senem, thanks a lot for giving this wonderful case study of Turkey. And during Q&A session, I think we would discover the role of TICA in all this humanitarian response. Yes, thanks a lot for being with us from the USA and for being with us regardless of time zones. Thanks a lot.
We're currently in Turkey. Greetings from Turkey currently.
And now we would like to proceed towards our next speaker, and I'm very glad and honored to introduce Ambassador Igor Khalevinskiy, who has a very rich experience of work in the Russian MFA and in the United Nations system, and currently he is the chairman of Russian Diplomat Association. Your Excellency, the floor is yours. Thanks a lot for being with us. Igor Vasilievich, yes, we can hear you, Your Excellency.
But no visage.
Yes, no.
Okay, right. So thank you very much. But why?
Oh, we can see you now. Thanks a lot, Igor Vasilievich.
Okay, great. Really very interesting discussion because public diplomacy plays a major role nowadays in this contemporary world. I was invited to share some experience of humanitarian aspects of the United Nations activities because for 5 years, since 1998 to 2003, I was head of the UN office in Belgrade. It was part of the United Nations mission in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but included all, now it is Northern Macedonia, Albania, Croatia, and Montenegro, etc. Actually, I witnessed during those months of NATO bombing in Yugoslavia, I witnessed the level of devastation, the spirit of people. But I'd like to say somehow everything was somehow with some so to say, planning approach. Before the bombing, of course, we were not, it is because of the bombing, but I got a cable from the UN headquarters from New York that all members of the UN office, citizens of the NATO countries should immediately leave the country, which we did. And what we were doing, actually, we set up a satellite radio station, and every late night we were sending cables to New York to the headquarters, what was going on, what is the level of devastation. But still, really, two so-called outside the meetings of UN Security Council took place. They were coming to Belgrade and Kosovo. There was a huge United Nations delegation of different agencies went to Kosovo. We were, of course, making contacts with the authorities somehow stop bombing during those missions, and they did. It was really interesting how we were doing, how United Nations was active during that dramatic time. We would like to say that yes, citizens of the NATO countries left my office, political office of the United Nations mission. but all humanitarian agencies, Children's Fund, World Health Organization, headed by people from NATO countries, they stayed and were really doing what was possible under those circumstances. The Under-Secretary General of the United Nations for Security, Benon Sivan, appointed me due to the situation as a UN designated official for security, and we had regular meetings of all representatives of UN agencies. I was informing what is the situation that's going on, what are the actions of the authorities, and really we kept constant contact with each other. It was a collective UN team. Actually, there was also every evening I had a telephone call, talk with the Assistant Secretary General Danilo Turk, who became later on the President of Slovenia, and telling him what was going on, and he was transmitting the information to Secretary General Kofi Annan. And during that campaign, Kofi Annan once arranged the meeting, a UN meeting in Geneva. I was invited there. Really, it was such a contrast after this Sirena bombing to come to Geneva. It was a dull atmosphere. And that was really constant contact with the situation on the terrain by the highest authority of the United Nations. After the situation changed and the end of the campaign, UN agencies started to work in a very active manner. We dealt with the relevant Commissioner for Refugees, with displaced persons. There were hundreds of thousands displaced persons. And we arranged demonstrative destruction of weaponry collected from the population. And it was really peaceful time. And OSCE donated and finished the construction of a police academy in the south of Serbia, which was really good thing to stabilize the situation. I would like to say that somehow judging that situation with Afghanistan, I just really can appreciate a very active role of a UN representative at a certain time in Afghanistan, who was Slovak ambassador Jan Kubiš. But he was really promoting case of Afghanistan at every conferences, webinars. One can read about that in social network. But since that, I lost any track. What was the UN? The last one, recent one, I read that Secretary General had an online meeting with the UN agencies, so to say, online. But of course, you can't really compare the level of tension and danger in Afghanistan vis-a-vis Yugoslavia, but still somehow Jan Kubiš was managing those things. Maybe UN also should have been more active with this coalition. So one can say that for us in Yugoslavia, we were getting great support from NGOs. There were a lot of NGOs. And
so just 2 seconds, someone has entered and creating disturbance. Just 2 seconds. We would like to request everyone not to admit anyone in the room. Just 2 minutes.
I think vis-a-vis the situation in Afghanistan, one should really compare the situations in other dramatic areas, how the UN international organization should have acted. Because in Yugoslavia, we had complete touch of the situation and really were influencing the meeting, the situation. And immediately after the end of the hostilities, we immediately started to rectify situation. We cannot see anything like in Afghanistan. Maybe it was really a mistake for the UN not to be active with the coalition forces in Afghanistan. And I think they believe that for 20 years with that huge amount of weaponry, troops, everything is all right, but it proved that it is not true. So I think public diplomacy, NGOs, this is the source of our strength. As Secretary General Kofi Annan said once, that the strength of the United Nations is in the NGO. And that is really important. Thank you very much.
Dear Your Excellency, dear Igor Vasilievich, thank a lot for sharing your greatest and your richest experience that maybe none of us sitting here has. And I think that this case study in this dramatic period being on the top of the UN system, it should be included in the manuals of peace building and conflict studies. And for sure, it now resembles a lot with the current Afghanistan and Syrian crisis. And it's great that then in such dramatic moments, people like you are taking the decisions to help these people who are in need and to help them and to make everything possible from the international community. So thanks a lot for sharing your richest experience in the sphere of humanitarian diplomacy. Thanks a lot for finding time. And now some of our speakers have technical problems. I would like to know if Mr. Devanshi Shah is here. Okay, then maybe they would join us sometime later, because now nowadays a lot of people didn't come back from their holidays, and I know that the places where they're now, sometimes there are some technical problems for getting access to Zoom. So maybe I would like to ask some questions to our speakers, and maybe later, if our speakers come back, we would be glad to listen to them. I've mentioned about one question to Senem Cevik. Since she has a baby, maybe she would have to go urgently. So, dear Senem, could you please ask us about the role of TICA in the sphere of Turkish humanitarian diplomacy?
Yes, thank you for the question, Anna. So TICA is Turkish Cooperation and Coordination Agency. It's how can I say, it's similar to USAID, USAID, for example, and it was established in 1992, right, after the newly emergent Turkic states were formed. So this basically, the establishment overlaps with Turkey's ambitions to reach out to its Turkic brothers or its region. And at the time, it was mostly, it was based on Central Asia and the countries like, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, the stands of that area, and the Balkans. And currently, the organization has offices all around the world, including very remote places that you would maybe not think of, but they are opening more offices in places where currently Turkish foreign policy is aiming to be more active. For example, Latin America and the African continent. I have personally been to a number of these offices to interview their bureaucrats or the people who work at the offices and their local partners. And I can talk a little bit about their cooperation and how they work together. I've been to Namibia offices. I've been to their Kenya offices, their Colombia offices, and Mexico offices. And what I saw was they do excellent job in finding partners, local partners. They don't go find partners. What they do differently than some of the other Western counterparts is, instead of them finding partners in the local countries, the local people come to them and they ask for small projects and the approval for the projects. For example, a woman's handcraft workstation in Namibia. It was approved very fast. Instead of, if you apply, you're local and you apply to American for foreign aid, you need to file all kinds of detailed paperwork. And they said it takes months and months to get a few $1,000s of something, maybe a sanitation, a bathroom, or funding for some crafts and, you know, or like a preschool. I went to see a daycare center, again in Namibia, and all they needed was a playground for kids. And they applied to other Swedish agency and so forth, but it took a long time to get the approval. So they said, okay, we heard there are Turks here, let's apply to them. And TICA approved very fast, and they had everything in a matter of like 2 months or something. So the difference that I've heard from locals is that TICA, the Turkish Cooperation Coordination Agency, how they do things is much faster and much efficient, but they do smaller projects. They don't do big scale projects. And they operate in all places around the world. And they don't look for, you know, anything about religious affinity or cultural affinity. They set up an office depending on where there's a need, but where also Turkey wants to expand its sphere of influence, so to say. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yes, Senem, thanks a lot. And also TICA has much more pronounceable name than Russian. Россотрудничество, at least for the foreigners, it's much more easy. So thanks a lot for sharing this vision of their work. And now I would like to ask Daria, how, if she's with us here, how did the COVID situation influence the work of the CBSS? Some new projects emerging. So how are you dealing with the crisis? Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Anna, for question, but it's basically very, I think, similar impact. We are an international organization and we are based in our activities a lot of providing platforms for international meetings and taking part in different kind of activities. But also I would like to mention that we are very active in our own projects. We are asking for financial support from different structures. So we have a lot of our own projects, which is very much about networking and building partnership. And of course, it is a challenge since, yes, we are located in very developed countries when it comes to digital solutions, Sweden and Nordic countries. So it's not a problem to organize online meetings, and we really manage. But what we if just to mention challenges, I think that this kind of interactive brainstorming meetings facing some real hindrances on the screen, you know, when it's just ordinary partner meetings or follow-up, whatever, it functions well. And what I can also highlight that we, even after pandemic, the world will never be the same, and I'm very sure that we will remain in a very big extent in this digital kind of world, yes, and meetings and whatever. And honestly, I found that a lot of meetings really did not diminish the quality because of digital meetings. It was very smoothly organized and whatever, but some of them, which I also mentioned, is an important part of us to build the networks among local actors and different kind of professionals, but also academic mobilities, which is very much about to come physically, to get the study visas, to get working in different kind of research infrastructures, to be with their peer learning. This is the most challenging part during the COVID times. But also I'd like to refer to what Senem told about these support facilities for local actors. CBSS currently has its own fund. It's called Project Support Facility Fund, where we're also trying to react very efficiently on requests from local actors. NGOs are welcome to take part in applying for us. It's not a big money. We can provide maximum 65,000 euro, but it's very good as a starting point to draw bigger projects, but also to build the partnerships. And what we are facing now, that many of our applicants and also leading partners are replying to us to prolong this time of implementation of the project, because again, when we are coming to these people-to-people diplomacy projects are very, very much based on physical meetings in person, on striving to get and learn more. So I mean, this screen digital meeting is a very good, probably with the with the meeting like we have now, information exchange, whatever. But if you like to enrich this format of really personal connections, then you really need to travel. And it's even more challenging because, as I mentioned, only part of our council consists of EU countries, which now is more or less allowed to travel. But then we have also Russia, which is a little outside, and due to the moment, it's until 31st of October when we are not allowed to travel in between the areas, and we suffering a lot because it's a lot of very good events where we usually provide CBSS support in kind of meetings and whatever, but it's not valid and it's not possible so far. So we are really looking forward to continue after this pandemic time. But as I mentioned, the world will never be the same, and we still will continue with this digital format, I'm very sure. And another challenge what we are in CBSS dealing with is this issue with remote at work. I mentioned that labor and employment is one of our priorities, and also we are discussing how to provide a good legislation formats for this remote and mobile work issue, which became into place during the pandemic. And basically we facilitated from CBSS side the very open information exchange among labor market actors, as the trade unions and employer organizations, to find the common way, not to sacrifice the rights of the employers, but also employees. Important. Nobody basically knows who takes the and to what extent employer should take responsibility of employees sitting at home, and also a question how many people will be in favor even after pandemic to return to their formal regular working place, because many, at least among our member states, their citizens feel quite comfortable to remain at least partly. So I mean, what our task is during these pandemic times also to facilitate information exchange on most urgent issues. And together with Russian Ministry of Labor and agency Rostrud, we initiated a number of this exchange. Germany was very much active as a front runner in this legislation. So I think that it was our mission during also pandemic to manage with the new formats, to see what advantages we can find. We even managed with 2 ministerial meetings during the pandemic time of ministers of foreign affairs. So I mean that we are surviving, but looking forward that these challenging times will come over.
Yeah, Daria, thanks a lot for covering this, all various levels of the humanitarian cooperation of the CBSS state. And also, would you please, during 1 minute, say about humanitarian diplomacy spheres of Russian presidency and the upcoming presidency in the CBSS? Is there something about it?
Yes, but it will be, basically Russia will be a part of Troika from next July. Now we are enjoying Norwegian presidency, which just came into place from the 1st of July. It's rotating. It was too short time to tell more in details about CBSS, but we have rotating presidency now. It's Norway, but we also have Troika format. And from the next July, Russia will be in Troika. And the presidency as such will be between 23rd and 24th. So in 2 years' time, time is running. So Russia is very much active now, already preparing some general outlines, and luckily Norway is very much interested to involve Russia more in different kind of drafting. And what Russia is specifically interested in, what we can now see probably will be priorities also to put more focus on local cooperation to strengthen and support cooperation between Council of the Baltic Sea States and Union of Baltic Cities. Also implementation of sustainable development goals and climate issues is a very strong focus. Science and research cooperation, since Russia is a very active in Baltic Science Network, so-called, also in the framework of CBSS. So it's a lot of, but cities provides this NGOs and all kind of people-to-people contacts most efficiently. It's a city level, because they are living people who, first of all, they are physically implementing all beautiful strategies provided by higher political level, but it's people at place who take care about to implement even SDGs and to budget it, to include in city planning. And also it's a place when young people, youth is also one of the priorities, always been of Russian Federation, but of whole CBSS as such. So youth cooperation is not any kind of a general issue anymore. It should be very concrete, not with this very wide perspective of youth organizations, but it's a very good motto, nothing about us without us. So youth really like to be involved in a very practical and pragmatic way, and the cities and local communities really providing this opportunity for young people to be involved in Baltic Sea region cooperation. And it's our safety bag even for future.
Dear Daria, thanks a lot. I'm just missing these times when co-hosting together with Daria all wonderful public diplomacy and humanitarian diplomacy events. And Daria, thanks a lot for your great help, and missing these times, and hoping that sometimes in the future we will meet personally. Thanks a lot for being with us.
Thank you, Anna. I also was thinking when mentioning NGOs that I could also probably open some secret that in my former job I was chairing so-called Baltic Sea NGO network, and we were front runners and one of the organizers of several events in the frame of Baltic Sea NGO Forum with the Gorchikov Foundation from Russia, and Anna was there these times, and I still believe that NGOs is a very much important part of these people, not the only part, but very important part. So thank you for remembering. Thank you.
And also now I would like to ask our next speaker, Dr. Manish Dabhade. How do you think the pandemic would influence public diplomacy due to the fact that the majority MFAs are cutting their budgets due to the situation that healthcare systems, so we should improve some other expenditures, and MFAs of ministers of foreign affairs of various countries are cutting their budgets. So do you think it would influence public diplomacy, or public diplomacy is independent from MPAs, and this situation wouldn't influence it at all. So how do you think?
Yeah, that's a terrific question. See, what is happening is generally you see there was a downward trend in terms of maybe financial consolidation, especially related to Ministry of External Affairs budgets in many countries, not just India, but also other countries. So there was already a push, as I said at the outset itself, that there was already a push to really cutting down cost and moving towards more and more of digital outreach, digital format using a virtual medium. So what has happened with COVID is exactly now, in fact, that push has become much more severe, and you now see that because the cost of traveling, the cost of maybe hosting a delegation, obviously I don't see that there would be a complete end, because for example, a quad, I mean, you are going to have a quad in-person meeting as early as early next month. So physical meetings are going to happen, but generally I think the general push is that let's rationalize the budgets of the Ministry of External Affairs, and maybe try to be much more economical in using resources. So that would also include, rather than hosting the entire delegations, especially at the junior levels, it would be done online. So I think that thing is there, and you also would also see, for example, reaching out to the larger public. It was earlier through public events, so you had different national days, so it is going to be very limited in that sense, celebrations in the foreseeable future, because of the COVID, because of the different variants which are still going to affect us very negatively. But again, the second part, answering the second part of the question, I think as I was also discussing in my conclusions, but I did it very briefly, that there are a couple of issues which, in fact, also were brought to light because of the pandemic. So the question of digital access, the question of digital divide. So there seems to be a very big divide amongst the developed and developing countries in terms of access to digital technologies, to internet. The speed of internet, the quality of, connectivity, the degree of connectivity, I think is a very important question mark. And again, in terms of digital skills, do diplomats easily learn digital skills? So I think that is also a big question, because we all would have noticed that in UN Security Council meetings, which were aired live on YouTube channels or different channels, that there were issues of suddenly there was a break of video, there was a break of audio. So these sorts of digital skills also, to what extent can be learned quickly, can be so I think those sorts of challenges would remain in conduct of diplomacy, in the conduct of public diplomacy. So I hope, Anna, I've answered your question.
Yes, thanks a lot, dear Dr. Khanyavad. Thanks a lot. And now I see that our next speaker, Dr. Devanshi Shah, is with us. She is from Pandit Dindayal Energy University, and the topic of her speech is Paradiplomacy, an emerging dimension in Global South and Indian perspective. Dear Dr. Devanshi, the floor is yours. Thanks a lot for being with us.
Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you so much, NIATE, for giving me this opportunity. Okay, so yes, my topic of presentation today is the public diplomacy, the paradiplomacy. Just give me a sec. Yeah. So the topic is Paradiplomacy, an emerging dimension in the global south. This particular research is based on an Indian perspective. So first of all, I would like to address the idea of paradiplomacy, which was established in 1961. Now, the idea of paradiplomacy basically is a parallel diplomacy where cities are conducting foreign policy. Cities have an autonomous role in international relations. The idea emerged in 1961, which was coined in 1980s by two important research scholars, Igor and Paradiplomacy. In 1990s, multiple terms came into being. As you can see, the evolutions of terms led to constituent diplomacy, regional diplomacy, and so many terms that came into being to identify what paradiplomacy is. However, to make it concise, I would like to say that paradiplomacy basically talks about the regional economic integration at a local level, at a regional level. It talks about autonomy of subnational government. It talks about multi-dimensional scopes and how cities have an international role to play within the foreign policy. However, my topic is based on the idea of paradiplomacy in the global south. Now, there are predetermined notions and predetermined concepts of paradiplomacy because it was an idea that was developed in Western countries. It was an idea that was developed by European countries, and they had predetermined set of rules and scopes to identify how paradiplomacy should be functioning within the countries. But when we talk about the global south, the countries within the global south, they kind of changed, they kind of did not follow the exact predetermined notions. Rather, they had their own unique way of understanding and adopting the idea of paradiplomacy. So when we are talking about the word paradiplomacy, China wants to use the word urban diplomacy. One of the most important things about the global south is that most of these countries have major focus on economic development, political stance at the foreign policy. And another notion is most of these countries are generating low income. So their major focus is always going to be economic and urban development. And that's how they have inculcated the idea of paradiplomacy towards those vision. So China calls it an urban diplomacy. As we can see from this data, around 32% of China's cities engagement are in Asia. Maybe I can roughly say that around 713 countries have been integrated with China's cities. These could be coastal provinces of China. These could be regional provinces of China. They are integrated at a local level. And the basic integration is known as sister cities. 6% is in Africa, 6% is in Oceania, and 21% is in United States. That is the American continent, comprising of Latin America. And then 35% in Europe, that is around 776. So the strict reasons why China considers this as an urban diplomacy is of the fact that they want to moreover go towards the idea of economic diplomacy. It's for their urban development, the soft power approach, the regional cooperation, and cultural integration. One of the most important aspects of regional cooperation is that China is surrounded by most of the neighboring countries, and they have most of the coastal provinces. And because of those reasons, within the Asia, the regional proximity is one of the major issues. Most of the borders are in the conflicts with each other. So paradiplomacy, aka China's urban diplomacy, is a way to understand the regional integration, to enhance the regional integration, to develop, to urbanize the regional levels, local levels. There are so many provinces within China that are not developed, but because of these sister city agreements that comes under the idea of paradiplomacy can develop. And because of this development, a lot of foreign investments can come into China, which can give them economic diplomacy. And we can also talk about the cultural integration that China has to offer through the soft power approach within the context of urban diplomacy, for example, the Confucianist idea of China. So that's how China's urban diplomacy is defined within the global south paradiplomacy. Another country that I've picked out to understand the global south paradiplomacy is Brazil. Now, Brazil actually does not call it paradiplomacy, although Brazil constitutionalized the idea of paradiplomacy in 1988. Yet it has mostly used the word municipal foreign policy. So in 1988, when it was added in the constitution, Brazil has a very unique way to develop the idea of paradiplomacy. They have established paradiplomatic structures at a regional and at a local level. One of the important reasons to do that is the South-South cooperation. The Merciodades is one of their integration within the Latin America. And through Brazil's municipal foreign policy, they're trying to integrate the region's conflicts. So South-South cooperation is one of the utmost priority for Brazil in order to implement Brazil's municipal foreign policy. the paradiplomatic structures at the local level. Now, they have done it in a very unique way. They have tried to inculcate the idea of healthcare, education, politics, all of these agendas into the paradiplomatic structures, and their structures are very unique. One of the important facts about them inculcating paradiplomatic structures at local level is because the federal structures allows them to do so, and the fact that they have kind of put it into the constitution that paradiplomacy should be constitutionalized, which not many countries were able to do so. The climate change. The city of Sao Paulo have been very vocal in addressing the climate change issues. For example, the C40, that is the Climate Cities 40 initiative. Many of these agendas have been addressed through paradiplomacy of Brazil. The involvement of local authorities in the foreign policy. The way the Brazil foreign policy has been involved in the local authorities at the foreign policy, it's brilliantly done. I think many countries should learn how paradiplomacy can be followed and implemented in a much more unique way. The third country is the Indian perspective. So I picked out a country that is China, which has a completely different government structure. It's a non-federal structure, yet it was able to implement paradiplomacy, but in a unique way, not in a predetermined notion, not in a singular format, but rather in a different format. It had its own ways to follow and implement the idea. Then there was Brazil, which had a federal structure, but yet it did it in its own way, how from establishing paradiplomatic structures, international institutions, addressing the climate agendas. It did it in its own way. And here we have Indian perspective. Why India? Because India has a quasi-federal structure. It's not completely federal, but we cannot say that it's not a federal structure. Yet India has adopted the idea of paradiplomacy. However, India understood the idea of paradiplomacy late in 2014 because of the current Prime Minister, Narendra Modi. He reiterated the idea of paradiplomacy and brought a light on the competitive and cooperative federalism, which talks about how cities and state coordination is needed to enhance the foreign policy. So one of the important aspects is economic diplomacy through foreign investments. So as I said, that the utmost priority for the global South countries is the economic diplomacy, economic development, and urban development. And that's what the countries within this region have been trying to do. Economic development, there are multiple examples from Japan, examples from Russia, examples from United States, where cities have actually invested in Indian cities, and they have tried to create the idea of infrastructure and urban development, which is an utmost necessity for India right now because of its developing phase. The center-state coordination, as aware about India's geographic facts and also that there is so much diversity within India, the state and center.
Minute left, please, Doctor.
Okay, so we had, thank you so much, Anna. Yes, so we had a lack of center and state coordination, which became efficient because of the paradiplomacy. The sister city relations became a soft power approach for India. So that's what India learned from these global South countries and tried to implement paradiplomacy in its own way within the quasi-federal structure. The conclusion that we have over here is most of the cities want the paradiplomacy in the global South because of these major regions: economic development, cooperation, sub-regional integration, developing countries' approach to foreign policy, cities' engagement in international organization, as I spoke about. Thank you so much for listening to us. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, dear Dr. Shah. I've been the member of the working group at the International Studies Association of Sub-State Diplomacy, and I know that scholars from various countries understand it rather differently, but thank you for giving this perspective of various countries and of the difference and of the commonalities of this approach to para and sub-state diplomacy. Thanks a lot. And now I would like to introduce Dr. Nikolai Vadimovich Sukhov. Is he with us? Nikolai Vadimovich, can you hear us? Oh, that's great. Yes, Nikolai Vadimovich Sukhov is director of Russian Cultural Center in Syria. Nikolai Vadimovich, so glad to see you safe here. Thanks a lot for being with us. Could you please share your perspective of the humanitarian diplomacy, of Russian humanitarian diplomacy in Syria?
Hello, everybody. I'm glad to take part in this big conference, and very important, I think, conference. Now I am in the Moscow region, so in my Dutch house. It's the time of the annual leave, but in the fortnight I will return to Syria and will continue our job. So I choose the issue of the public diplomacy and humanitarian diplomacy in the conditions of the conflict. First of all, we don't leave the traditional, so-called traditional ways and tools of the human public diplomacy in these conditions. It includes cultural and humanitarian relations. As you know, maybe that there are historical long-term ties between Russia and Syria. There are more than 30,000 alumni of the Russian Soviet and Russian institutes, universities, and even schools. And there are about 20,000 now, 20,000 joint mixed families, where the wives are from the former Soviet Union, from the former Soviet republics, and from Russia, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, Belarus, and some Central Asian republics. So there is a big Russian-speaking diaspora, which continue to influence on the humanitarian and economical relations between Russia and Syria. So our job as Russian Cultural Center is to support the activities of the Russian communities, Russian-speaking community. Stress this because, as I told, there are different nationalities of the former Soviet Union, but they are united by the language and the culture, the traditions, where their husbands support them. And there are at least 3 generations now in Syria of the Russian-speaking families. So we them the support in their holiday, their parties, their historical events, their concerts of the Russian diaspora, also the meetings on the on the different occasions. In the conditions of Syria, it means even supply of the fuel to the buses to move from one town to another, to provide them the halls for the concerts and the meetings, and so on and so forth. Because in Syria conditions, it's now a crisis of the fuel, the crisis of the transportation. You know, we couldn't say that it's unsafe, because now in the most part of the Syria, which is controlled by the government, it's a quite safe situation. But anyway, we as a governmental institution there tried to provide different services which make their life easier. At the same time, we also provide them humanitarian aid. There are the food supply, some maybe winter, the things for the winter preparedness, and so on and so forth. This is the one of the aspects, the work with the Russian-speaking diaspora. The other one is the work with our graduate alumni of the different ages who graduated Russian and Soviet universities, beginning from the 60s of the last century. This is two-way cooperation, because we provide them our support, and they also support our politics, and they support our work in a different level there, because the thousands of these now occupy different positions of the middle high level in the government, in the local administrations, in the Ba'ath party organs, and so on. The important thing in the conditions of the Syrian crisis is the humanitarian aid. We have to concentrate our work on not on the cultural event, which we are providing also, but only on the wide range humanitarian aid, which includes not only the food supply, but first of all, the reconstruction of the infrastructure. And first, we concentrate on the supply of the schools and medical institutions by electrical generators, by panels, batteries, which could revive all these institutions, which are now mostly destroyed or out of work because of lack of energy, of the energy supply. Another thing is also the supply of the tools like electrical panels to the rural communities, so the tools to feed themselves. So because it's very important, Syria before the war, before the crisis, was the importer of the agricultural production, and now there are a lot of difficulties in the growth of the agricultural production because of lack of water. The water they extract by electricity. So Russian humanitarian politics includes such supplies, and indeed the local communities, local people are very grateful to Russia, and from my point of view, it's the best humanitarian influence on the minds of the locals to supply them the useful things which will work for long term and will bring them the tools to make the agricultural production, which will feed themselves, and in the close future will let them continue import to the neighbor countries as it was before the crisis, and will bring them the money, more money than now. So in brief, and also we don't forget the cultural aspect. We continue to bring different groups, musical and dance groups from Russia. Mostly there are the troops or groups from the Ministry of Defense. We know, Anna know, and my Russian colleagues here know that in each military district or in each army group, there is a musical groups. There are musical groups of dance and singing. So Russian military brings them about every month, and we arrange the tourney, the their concerts all over the country, which also rise the spirit of the local inhabitants, of local citizens. They feel during such concerts as if there is no war around them, and some piece of the peaceful life. This very precious moment, they commented in the social medias, and we can see the feedback that such events also give them the hope for the best future. This is in I want to say.
Thanks a lot, Nikolai Vladimirovich, for sharing your unique experience. I would just like to add that these music groups you've mentioned, these are military orchestras, so it's not like pop bands, it's military.
No, they even they sing and play the pieces of the modern music, not only Russian popular music, even classics sometimes, so of very different repertoire, and sometimes they even play the songs in Arabic, especially for Syrian public.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot, Nikolai Vladimirovich, for sharing your unique experience. Later, if we have some time, which we are running out, I would ask you as professional orientalist about historical aspects of Russian presence, humanitarian presence in the region. And now I have one more question left for our distinguished speaker, for Ambassador Igor Khalevinskiy. Dear Igor Vasilyevich, how do you think, what is the role of Russian Diplomat Association in promoting Russian humanitarian diplomacy? Could you please share your vision?
The role of the diplomatic what? Association?
Ambassador Khalevinskiy, what is the role of Russian Diplomats Association in promoting Russian humanitarian diplomacy, and how does it deal with the official diplomacy?
No, the official diplomacy.
It's the question for.
It's not for me. Excuse me, because
I would come back to you with one.
The sound is not unfortunate.
Igor Vasilyevich, we cannot hear you. Could you please?
Now you can hear.
Oh, yeah? Yes.
Well, Association of Russian Diplomats consists of some 400 people, half of them acting diplomats, half retired. So actually the bulk of our activities are bringing knowledge of diplomacy to the regions of Russia, to non-professional audiences. They are always welcoming diplomats, ambassadors. We have concluded a dozen of agreements on cooperation with the numerous subjects of the Russian Federation, also with our partnership association, China, South Korea, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzia, Slovakia, Czechia. So basically participation in the international conferences, webinars, it is really diplomatic. But maybe one can refer to humanitarian aspects. We have a very expanded work of setting up so-called schools of young diplomats everywhere. It's schools and we really recently set up a school of young diplomats in Norilsk, the northernmost area, in Kaliningrad, in many other subjects, republics, and we are bringing knowledge to children about diplomacy, what are the principles, how to be enrolled into GIMO and other. Always after setting up another school of young diplomats, I am telling my friend Anatoly Turkunov, rector of GIMO. So you will have a lot of aspirants joining GIMO from that republic. He's very happy. So that is the thing. And we are cooperating in different projects, programs of Россотрудничества. We are just supporting foreign students associations. Recently, we signed an agreement on cooperation with the Association of Foreign Graduates of the institutes, universities of the Central Russia and Northern Caucasus. So this is really a very active sphere of our work, and we're really very happy to see that people, audience, children are grateful for this gesture of our association. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Igor Vasilievich. Being from Siberia, I'm glad to hear that pupils from various Russian regions have the opportunity to have such a tutor and professor like you, and who have the possibility to enter GIMO. Thanks a lot for working actively in the sphere of sub-state and in the sphere of humanitarian diplomacy. Thanks a lot, Your Excellency. And now we have about 2 minutes left because another panel should start. I would just like to ask two brief questions to our two speakers. At first to Dr. Devanshi Shah, then to Dr. Nikolai Sukhov. Dr. Devanshi, I would like to ask, to what extent are Indian municipalities independent in promoting sub-state diplomacy, or do they cooperate closely with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs? Could you please share your perspective, but in about 1 minute, not more?
So the question for me, and could you repeat it, please?
It's for Devanshi.
For Devanshi.
Devanshi, please unmute yourself.
Devanshi, we cannot hear you. Unmute, please. No, we cannot hear you.
Admin, can you please unmute Devanshi?
Microphone is off. No, we still cannot. Okay, now I would like to ask Dr. Nikolai Vadimovich Sukhov, who is the professional Orientalist and historian. I would like to ask you, reading about Russian humanitarian presence in the Middle East, I've mentioned that in the 19th century, Russia was promoting East Orthodox ties with the people, with the Orthodox people, with the Christians of the region, while meanwhile Americans were building universities, schools for girls, and now they have all these American universities in Beirut, in Egypt. Do you think that since those times, Americans have some good positions through establishing universities and various schools for young leaders of the region? Was it some mistake for Russia to work only with Russian diaspora or with the Orthodox people, or was it otherwise it was some strength? And in Soviet times, we have established various university and exchange programs. So could you please share your perspective?
Okay, if we past that in the 19th centuries, Russia was very active in the Middle East, and as you mentioned, they also built the schools. They sent the Russian teachers there, and now we could even read their memories, and the books written by the Russian teachers who worked in the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century in Lebanon and Syria, or the Great Syria as it was then, and Palestine. Know that in the 1917 it was the revolution, and all these relations stopped. It was not mistake. It was the political reality and the changes in the Russian regime at that time. So nevertheless, till now, Syrian Lebanese remember that time. There are things still existed, the building of these schools. And now it's step by step, the Russian rhetoric Orthodox try to revive these old schools and revive these practices of the Russian schools, secular course, in Syria. Step will be work. Now it's the beginning way. At the same time, there was a Soviet experience, the wide range education of the Middle Eastern and African youth. You know, hundreds of thousands students studied in the Soviet Union, and they formed in countries. They formed the elites of this ruling class of that countries. This is not an exception, of course, and now a lot of Syrian students continue to go to Russia, and especially in the time of crisis when the sanctions, the restrictions from the Western countries stopped the flow of the Syrian students to the. They go to Russia mostly. Now we provide about 500 scholarships to Syrians, and will continue to enlarge. It's enough, of course, and it's not enough, first of all, because of the crisis of the human power and the experienced and well-educated human power in Syrian economy. I could say the 1/3 of the population is now out of this country, mostly well-educated and experienced specialists. You know that during the Soviet time and even till the end of 2080s, there were Russian universities, the schools in Syria. Then they were closed, and now our different institutions seek for foundation, for money to open such schools and institutes in Syria. As I told, there are objective причины у нас, obstacles to open such educational institutions. First of all, it's lack of electricity, lack of the fuel, and common situation. First, we have reconstruct the infrastructure of this country. The second step, it will be the construction of the educational cooperation on the land of Syria. Not to invite only Syrians to Russia, but to come to Syria and to build there the schools and universities. Of course, during this big 1 century period, Americans gained a lot of opportunities to form local elites. I know Syrian families whose children studied or continue to study now in the American University in Beirut. It's very close tie between Beirut, Lebanon, and Syria. So their influence is very strong. But I could say that the historical reason of such a situation because of the changes in our motherland, the revolution, then wars, and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, dear Nikolai Vadimovich. Thanks a lot to all our distinguished speakers for giving such an insightful perspective of various aspects of the humanitarian diplomacy, for giving theoretical framework for it, for analyzing various case studies based on your richest experience. And thanks a lot for being on today's panel that was hosted by NICE and by Russian Academy of National Economy of
My apologies, I was actually unallowed by the host to mute. I was unallowed by the host to unmute.
Yes, sorry, please, but already the next panel should start. Yes, thanks a lot, Dhanyavad. Thanks a lot. And I would like to thank all our speakers, and I would like to thank Dr. Pramod Jaiswal for having this panel done, organized, and for hosting such wonderful events where more than 40 countries participate and where practitioners and scholars from all over the world can share their experience. And thanks a lot to our distinguished speakers that you have found time, regardless of busy timetable, to be with us here. And thanks a lot to all our listeners from various corners of the world for being with us today. Best wishes from Moscow.
Distinguished Chair, speakers, ladies and gentlemen, as we have come to the end of this session, we would like to express our sincere gratitude and thanks to the Chair for agreeing to chair and moderate the session today. Our sincere thanks also goes to all the speakers for being a part of the event and delivering such comprehensive and convincing presentations. We would like to acknowledge our gratitude to our friends from the diplomatic community, experts, academia, media, and different organizations. Finally, we must also mention our deep sense of appreciation for the audience who participated in the webinar and those who are watching us live. Thank you for your valuable time and attention, and for making this session productive with your questions. Once again, we are truly honored to have you all with us today. Please do join us in the next session. Thank you so much.